When I'm not hitting up my Aunt Stormy for some cash, I like to answer questions that I get on YouTube. So let's get to it. Great video. This begs for an answer to the eternal question, Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page? The Battle of the Jimmys is probably the #1 question in all of guitar history. And it is so hard to answer because I feel like there are two sides of my brain. One is totally devoted to Jimmy Page. One is totally devoted to Jimi Hendrix. Both played kind of like an equal role in my developmental stage as a player. And really, Hendrix was like the reason I started playing guitar. I'm just kind of hearing his music for the first time. As a late teenager, I was totally into it. I went on a deep, deep Hendrix dive. Shortly thereafter, I discovered Led Zeppelin, and really those two have had an incredible amount of influence on my playing. And really, it's kind of like amazing because they're such different players. Kind of like the looseness of the Jimi Hendrix kind of like rhythm and strat sound, even though some people say that Jimmy Page was like a loose player too. But I still kind of see his compositionally writing style as a little bit more technical and focused. But I'm gonna have to, if I had to pick one, I'm gonna throw down to Jimi Hendrix's corner. I'm a strat single coil guy at heart. I think he was probably the more unique singular talent because it's almost like just anytime he picked up an instrument, just no matter who he was playing with, what was around, just absolute magic happened. Again, I would never say anything bad about Jimmy Page, but I think Hendrix is my guy. And there's really no answer, there's no wrong answer to that question. How many pairs of jeans do you have? I'm trying to get a better tone. So some of the longtime subs out there know that the contrarian in me has not allowed myself to ever own a single pair of blue jeans. I used to say I never owned a pair of jeans, but I've kind of graduated to wearing these gray pants that have a denim component. So I personally do not qualify these as jeans, but I've been getting a lot of brushback locally and online about what jeans actually are. So I'm amending my statement to saying I've never worn a pair of blue jeans, which I think still counts as allowing me to keep my contrarian card. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of graying it out this year. Hey, Sean wanted a little advice on music sheet reading. How can I tell by key signature if the music is based on major or minor key? For instance, the G major and E minor both share the same sharp note, F. On a sheet, you can only see an F sharp, so how can I tell if the key is G major or E minor? Thanks as always. Really interesting question, actually, and you're right on as far as if you've never read sheet music before, there's a little indicator at the beginning of every piece that tells you what key it's in, denoted by the number of sharps or flats in it. And most of the time, that is always denoted as what major key it's in. So like if you're doing something in the key of G, that's kind of how people, I feel that's kind of how people default read that. But as far as whether a piece is in G major or E minor, again, the same notes, you kind of have to dig a little bit further. So for example, if a piece starts on a G major chord or a G note, that's kind of a great indication that it's gonna be major. Generally, it's where the tonal center is or where home is perceived. So if you're playing something, you know, with either G or E minor, and you know, whatever, you're playing into the piece, and then you try resolving on a G, it's in G. If the resolve is on an E minor, then it's in E. Another way to tell is kind of like seeing where the dominant, where the 5 chord is kind of used. So again, we've talked a lot about in the music theory videos, like the 5 chord of any major key is where the dominant 7 chord exists. So in the key of G, it would be a D7. So if you ever see a D7 in a piece, odds are that piece is in the key of G major. Now, even though E minor has the same notes as the key of G major, sometimes its dominant will actually contain a note outside of the key, right? So if we went from E, like let's just go to E major real quick, right? So the 5 chord in the key of E is a B7. Delete it back. But even in something in the key of G, you can use like a B7 to get back to an E minor if something's in the key of E minor. So if you're really confused by it and for some reason you need to find out, maybe take a look for where accidentals are. If you ever see on sheet music where maybe a note that is outside of the key happens, there will be like a little indicator that maybe this note, they have to mark it with either sharp or flat to kind of see where it goes outside of the key. So if the dominant leads back to the relative minor, that makes sense to you guys, then definitely you're looking at a minor piece. If the dominant is just the regular 5 chord, then you're looking at a major piece. But again, using your ear is always the best way to find out. Play the piece, listen to it, and try to resolve, and that'll usually kind of tell you the answer.
The first note you played is Do, not C, bro. And the first chord you played is C, B major, not C major, C major, have 5 Ds. Check what you're going to say, then say it, bro.
I don't know if this counts as a Salty Blues comment or just the rambling of a madman. Like, check what you're gonna say, then say it. Like, very firmly preceded by some absolute gibberish that makes no sense to me whatsoever. Thank you, Sean, for yet another great video. One question: what are your thoughts on playing individual strings for fills, mini solos, etc., as per your excellent lessons on scales and arpeggios? Keep the jokes coming too. Making my chords more interesting is my current front runner. So yeah, I think single string fill solos are great, especially for riffing. So that's why I think learning your scales, pentatonic, major, minor, and otherwise, mode shapes is great going across the strings. But just as valuable, you want to take an interval approach and be able to do it on one string. So like the major scale on an open E string, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Or the minor scale being able to kind of do the same thing and jump into the different intervals, like knowing that like, all right, a minor 7 interval isn't just down 2 strings, the same fret. It's actually, I could start on the E string and then go to the 10th fret, so maybe 10 frets higher. Even though that's like a very long reach, I think it can really come in handy when kind of playing kind of those little riffs or mini fills in between chords. So learning your intervals is really just another way of saying learning your scales, and that stuff is super, super helpful. That will always be able to show up in your playing, especially if you're just kind of chilling on one chord and just being able to kind of just go back and forth without really having to put a lot of thought into like, okay, I'm going from this chord to this chord, etc. Really just kind of find a chord, root note, be thoughtful about where the other intervals exist from that root note both directions. Like say you're in the key of A major and you're rooting it on the 5th fret of the E string. You can think of maybe going whole step, half step, and maybe just kind of thinking of these 3 notes to kind of extend what you're doing, but also think of like the notes before it. So it's major 7 would be 1 fret back. Its minor is 3 frets back. So again, just being able to be aware forward and backwards of intervals on one string is super important. You are not Irish. I've been accused of a lot of things through my YouTube tenure, but being accused of not being Irish is a new one. So I just thought I'd showcase that because St. Paddy's Day is coming up, everybody. For listening homework this week, I'm going to throw you to a band called Lake Street Drive. I think they have a cool kind of retro, vintage, Motown-ish, R&B inspired kind of vibe going that I think is pretty cool. So check those guys out. And if you have any comments or questions, hit me up in the comment section, Instagram, Twitter, or the website. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks a lot.